Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the masculine and feminine perspective relative to the emotions for the purpose of Anima and Animus integration. Now in a moment I'm going to dive into the practical importance of this information for the purpose of Anima and Animus integration, but first I want to give a quick caveat, and that caveat is that when I say masculine and feminine, I don't mean man-likeness and woman-likeness. What I'm referring to is more in the sense of yin and yang, these two polar aspects of our personality that everyone has. So we all have a masculine side and we all have a feminine side. And so for the purpose of this video, I ask you to not really think about this so much in terms of gender. The gender is really more of a metaphor for something that's very universally human and actually beyond human, really. So basically, you want to think about the masculine and feminine principle as something that's in everybody. And so that means that you have a masculine and feminine side, and everybody else has a masculine and feminine side as well. And for this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to integrate the masculine and feminine side through this awareness of the emotional perspectives that both of those sides tend to take. So the purpose here is for the general integrations of these inner opposites, and so you can refer to this as anima or animus integration in Jungian terms, and then also being able to shift back and forth between these two perspectives so that we can have a deeper sense of emotional awareness and a sharper sense of emotional mastery. So I'm about to go into the difference between the masculine side's perspective on the emotions and the feminine side's perspective on the emotions, but first, I really want to hammer down really the fundamental similarity here, because the similarity is really the crux of all of these things. So basically what's similar is the emotional experience itself. The emotions are the same regardless of whether your natural set point is to be in the masculine perspective or the feminine perspective. So we all have the ability to experience essentially the same type of emotions just by virtue of the fact that we are human beings. So with the fundamental awareness of that similarity, basically, you want to think about our emotional experiences being like a city. So just to make an analogy, imagine that all of our emotional happenings that occur within our internal landscape as being like this bustling city with lots of buildings and lots of people and lots of commotion going on. And that's the same for everybody regardless of what perspective they take. So relative to this city, let's say that the masculine perspective is like a bird's eye view of the city, and the feminine perspective is like a street view of the city. So they're taking in the same city, but they just have a different perspective. And so when we're integrating our masculine side, or we're integrating our feminine side, or trying to master either one of those things, what we're essentially doing is we're practicing taking the opposite perspective from what we would normally take. So when a person is disintegrated relative to their masculine side and their feminine side in these emotional ways, what happens is they get jammed into one perspective or the other. So the person's either gets jammed up in the bird's eye view point of view and can't actually land, or the person gets jammed down onto the street where they can't actually rise above and to actually see the big picture view of things. And so you see, it's really, really important for us to have this integration between the masculine and feminine side. Otherwise, we lose perspective entirely if we can only experience things from one point of view. And so with that in mind, I want to go deeper into this metaphor to tell you more about the masculine side's perspective on the emotions and the feminine side's perspective on the emotions. So remember, the masculine side is that bird's eye view. And so if you can think about the way that a bird sees things. So, and imagine the city again is our emotional core. So it's like somebody who sees the emotional core from a distance. It's somebody who is able to look down and see all of the major landmarks, all of the major buildings, and have a good overall layout of that city. But they also are not necessarily seeing the details. Like a bird can maybe see all these big buildings and everything, but they couldn't necessarily see all of the different things going on down in the street. Like all the people walking there probably look like ants. They probably wouldn't get a clear sense of like the sounds and the smells going on there because they're too far away to hear those nuances of the city. And so on the positive side, for the masculine perspective relative to the emotions, we have somebody that can look at the emotions from a distance, which enables a person a healthy kind of stoicism to be able to look at the emotions and to decide whether or not they want to do this particular action or that particular action. It's also really good for quick strategic decision making. So there's a kind of decisiveness that comes from mastery of this masculine perspective on the emotions. The emotions are also incredibly easy to read at this point of view. So basically, you get emotions from this point of view in very broad strokes. So you can look and you can say that, oh, I like this, or oh, I don't like this, or oh, I feel angry, oh, I feel sad, oh, I feel happy, where it's very, very simple. And in its simplicity, that enables us not to get caught down in all of the subtle nuances of the emotions. And so it's easier to master the masculine perspective in this way. So the key word here relative to the emotions is emotional mastery. So the zone of dominance for the masculine side relative to the emotion is emotional mastery, and that I'll be talking about later on in the video as a practical skill you can cultivate in order to integrate your masculine side more and to sharpen more of your masculine skills relative to the emotional experience. Now, I'm going to go over and talk about some of the negatives of the masculine perspective. And these negatives tend to crop up whenever somebody doesn't have a clear integration of their feminine side. So a lot of the negatives on both of the masculine and the feminine perspectives come simply from the disintegration and not being able to switch perspectives. So one of the things that can be quite negative about the masculine perspective in its disintegrated form is that it can become very cold and detached from the emotions. It can basically pretend like that emotional city isn't even there. So the potential for a bird flying high above the city, it could completely veer off from the emotions entirely, only look up and decide never to look down at that city, or just not be present, go somewhere else. And so with that, basically the connection from the emotions can easily be lost. And so there's a danger of becoming ungrounded from ourself, from our emotional compass. And so this is something that tends to happen if we're not able to really zoom down into the emotions closer and have more of that street view. Another thing is that the masculine perspective is not very good with a detailed view of the emotions. So basically, they can tell the emotions in those broad strokes like happiness, sadness, anger, but you basically miss from that perspective a lot of the small details going on. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to differentiate from that perspective between rage and frustration and just being a little annoyed. Like all of those would kind of be under the anger umbrella, and there wouldn't be much of a nuanced awareness. And so it doesn't lend itself very well to an intuitive knowing of the emotions in the way that the feminine side does. And you would need to cultivate the feminine side and that relationship to the emotions to have those benefits. All right, now for the feminine perspective. So the feminine perspective is a street view of that city. So if you can imagine that you're a person walking around on the street and you can take in all of the sensations of a city. You smell food being cooked by food vendors. You hear people chattering in and around the street corners. You can look around and you can see all the buildings around you, as well as even the tiniest blade of grass right next to you. And instead of the big picture view that the masculine perspective has, the feminine perspective has a very up close and personal, detailed view of this emotional city. Now, the feminine perspective has many positives, but emotional mastery needs to be cultivated first before you can reap the benefits of those positives. And the feminine has a pretty steep learning curve. So basically, the feminine is in its element relative to the emotions because the emotions belong to the feminine principle and are most informed by yin. But there's also a very steep learning curve relative to the emotions in that there's a lot there to actually decipher and to know how to make distinctions between one emotion and the other. So it's like this experience of reading a complex text versus reading a text that's very, very simple. It takes a while to hone one's skills in to actually pick up on the subtle nuances and distinctions and themes within that text. So you're basically learning to read the emotions as another language. And so a lot of the positives come from just having the experience of knowing how to read those emotions, which requires the integration of the masculine side. And then the negatives tend to come when a person doesn't know how to read those emotions very well, doesn't know how to cultivate emotional awareness. So one of the positives of the feminine perspective is that you can pick up on all of those subtle little nuances going on in the emotional experience because you're right up close and personal with it. You're able to really sense all of the different textures and everything going on with the emotions. And the emotions are really the seat of wisdom. So emotions always carry wisdom with them. And the degree to which we can immerse ourselves and become aware of the emotions is the degree to which we can extract that wisdom. This is also why wisdom, Sophia, tends to be part of the feminine principle as well. And as I said before, it's also in its element, like the emotions are the feminine's domain. And so in this way, it's a very positive thing to have cultivated this relationship to the emotions, because if you don't first have your feet on the ground in this, you're not going to be able to develop emotional mastery in the first place. So this is really the primary place that you want to go to first whenever you are cultivating these qualities, is you want to actually put boots on the ground on that city. And when a person does that in a way that's skillful, they can become very adept at reading their own emotions and also reading the emotions of others, and it puts them directly in connection to the intuition. It also allows them to basically emotionally regulate very easily, because when you have a very deep awareness of what's going on in the emotions, it's like you've shined the light on it. Nothing's in the dark. And so when things are lit up, it becomes a lot less intense to deal with the emotions. So the zone of dominance relative to the feminine side's relationship to the emotions is emotional awareness. So the masculine is emotional mastery. The feminine is emotional awareness. So these are the two things that you really want to cultivate in order to have an integration and a high level of skillfulness on both sides. Now the negative relative to the feminine perspective on the emotions is that sometimes when a person is not able to go in with a sense of emotional mastery, the emotions just completely overwhelm them. They become swept down in all of those details and nuances, and they can't make sense of anything. It's like hard. It's almost like they've gotten dropped into a big thing of water and now they can't swim. And so when this happens, like a person can become quite vague and non-articulate, like they can't actually express from their emotions. They can also become manipulative because the emotions would be essentially back in the shadow, and when something's in the shadow, what it does is it basically finds some way to sneak out and gain conscious control over the personality. And so a lot of times people who act in very passive-aggressive ways or are very non-direct with how they try to get things done are that way simply because they are overwhelmed by their emotions. They are not aware of what's going on. They just have so many nuances coming at them and they haven't learned to read or decipher them, at least in regard to that particular area of life. Another thing is that the feminine perspective can sometimes be too close to read the emotions. So you need that ability to back up. So basically, you want to think about the masculine perspective on the emotions. If somebody's stuck in that, it's like trying to watch a small television set from very far away. They can see some general blobs of color and stuff that's going on, but they're not going to really be able to pick up on all of the details of the picture. Whereas the feminine perspective, if somebody's stuck in that one, it's like having their nose pressed right up against the television screen. They're not going to be able to actually tell what's going on because they're too close to be able to see what's going on. And for them, it's all going to be just blobs as well. And sometimes even somebody back in this perspective can maybe get a clearer idea of what's going on the television as opposed to somebody who's like right pressed up against the glass. And another thing that's a drawback to the feminine perspective is that it can be quite hard to read. So it's very complex, and in that it's like the difference between learning how to read Clifford the Big Red Dog and learning to read War and Peace. So the masculine perspective on the emotions is very simple because it's a zoomed out view. So it's easy to master that perspective. That's like reading Clifford the Big Red Dog. Whereas the feminine perspective is so down in all of those nuances that it just takes such a learning curve to, basically be able to master that. And unfortunately, in our culture, in our society, we don't put much stock in emotional intelligence and emotional awareness in general because society doesn't value it that much. And so a lot of times there's a lot of people that just get totally swept down in their emotions and they don't know how to read them. So similar to how we talked about the negative aspects of the masculine side, the negative aspects of the feminine side can also be mitigated through the development of the masculine perspective and the integration of the masculine perspective. So you can see why it's so important to have this integration between the masculine and feminine, because if you don't have that, basically there's just going to be parts missing and you're going to get stuck in one of these perspectives or the other. So in order to cultivate this emotional integration of both the masculine and feminine side, we need both skills of emotional awareness and emotional mastery. And so I'm going to give some practical steps at how to cultivate each. All right, so when it comes to cultivating emotional awareness, the key word here is sensitivity. So oftentimes emotional sensitivity tends to get looked down upon as though it's like a negative thing. It tends to be used as like something to say, oh, somebody's too sensitive or this kind of thing. And there's a lot of stigma around that. But basically, it's a really, really important skill to have to be able to tap into your emotions at a very deep and subtle level. So the way I would put this is I want you to imagine that I'm wearing a rubber glove, like a very thick rubber glove. And I go around and I'm trying to pet a cat and I'm like trying to feel the bark of a tree and then I'm feeling a bunch of cloth. I'm not going to be able to really pick up on most of the experience of what's going on because I'm not sensitive enough. My hand has been desensitized by the glove. And so all sensation is going to feel like the inside of a rubber glove. But if I take that rubber glove off and I allow my hand to breathe, what I can do is I can pet that cat and I can feel the exact texture of the fur, I can feel the texture of the tree bark, I can feel the texture of the cloth, and everything has differences, everything has all of these different nuances. And so when you're cultivating emotional awareness, it's basically learning how to take the rubber glove off. It's learning how to subtract everything that gets in the way of our awareness of our emotions so that we can deeply immerse ourselves in our emotional experience and really, really be down on that street view. All right, so the first thing that you want to do is you want to master your mind relative to your emotions. So you want to orient the mind in such a way that it affirms the presence of your emotions and doesn't get in the way of your experience of it. That would be the rubber glove that you're taking off, is all of these different projections that we would put on over our emotions. And this can even be something as simple as even labeling the emotions as this or that thing. So for example, if we label something as anger, what that might stop us there is like, oh, we know that already, and so we don't get any further down into the nuances of like what shade of anger we're experiencing and how that's actually playing out in the body. So you want to sort of be able to move the mind out of the way when you're trying to get into the direct experience of your emotions. All right, so the second thing you want to do is you want to tune more into the body. So basically, that emotional city is right here. It is your body. The emotions are only probably 10% happening in the mind, and that's based on like what our mind makes of what's going on. The emotions really play out in the body. And so you want to cultivate bodily awareness, not just of the subtle sensations of the emotions, but the more gross sensations of just feelings that we have. Like if I slap my wrist, I can feel that, and so what you can do is you can basically hone in on all of these different sensations that happen in the body. And I personally recommend doing something like body scan meditation or various forms of yoga where you're really focused on getting an awareness of what's going on in the body without the mind placing its projection screen over it. You want to get really, really in touch with body on the level of being. And the third thing is you want to practice seeing your emotions exactly as they are without editing them or without going up into the mind. So a lot of times, let's say if we experience a sense of anger at someone, we'll have a tendency to go into our mind and say, oh no, that anger is invalid because I know that that person's a good person or they meant well or this or that or the other thing. And that's good, in terms of emotional mastery. But when it comes to emotional awareness, it's really, really important to feel our emotions at full stretch. We need to hold space for our emotions in their entirety. So in a nutshell, the key to cultivating emotional awareness is to feel the sensations in your body as they are, exactly as they are, without the mind coming in and interrupting anything. And so once you've gotten a degree of emotional awareness, what you're going to then do is you're going to start working toward emotional mastery, because both emotional awareness and emotional mastery should work together, should oscillate with one another, should be integrated. So too much of one or too much of the other is not good. You want to have both. So with emotional mastery, the idea here is that once you become aware of your emotions, that's when you decide how you respond to them. So it's basically it's training your mind in such a way that it works with your emotions and not against your emotions, and that it can make basically wise responses to your emotions. So it knows how to express them clearly, it knows how to act from them clearly, it knows what's a wise decision and what's not a wise decision relative to acting upon the emotions. Alright, so the very first step for emotional mastery, and this riffs off of one of the previous steps from emotional awareness, is to cultivate an affirmative mindset relative to the emotions. You want to make sure that you are accepting of whatever happens to come up internally, because emotions can't be wrong in and of themselves. It would be like saying that the stars were wrong. So sensations in the body, which is what emotions are never wrong. They come up for a reason. Our body gives us those emotions for a reason. Now, it might not be the reason why our mind thinks it is, and it might not necessarily mean that you should just go ahead and take your first impression of what the emotion it means and run with it. But it is important to realize that whatever emotion comes up on the emotional stage is valid. It's supposed to be there. And so it's important to have your mind oriented in that way, and that's going to again help with emotional awareness as well. So the second step is to figure out how you're going to respond to your emotions in a way that's helpful and beneficial as opposed to harmful and detrimental. So basically, the emotions are valid exactly as they are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our mind is doing the right thing with them in terms of what's going to benefit us or others the most. So we want to basically vet our emotions and be able to be like, okay, knowing that this is my emotion, what is going to be the best way to express that? And the third thing is that once you have decided how to respond to your emotions and once you've cultivated that affirmative mindset, is you want to get really, really good at converting emotional awareness into intellectual awareness. So basically, the emotions register in the body is almost like this language, but it doesn't perfectly convert into thought. It doesn't perfectly convert into words. And so this is where you have to take your masculine perspective down into the feminine perspective through that integration. And what you can do is you can basically create form around the substance. So if the emotions themselves are the substance, but the substance doesn't convert well into a mental format, you want to go ahead and convert that into a mental format so you can communicate those truths from the emotions to yourself and to others. That way you can have an intellectual awareness of what's going on with the emotions. And this is something that takes a lot of practice and a lot of repetition. And you can have this practice and repetition through journaling. You can have this practice and repetition through making videos. I know I do. I practice in this way myself. You can also talk to other people about your ideas. You could talk to yourself. I do that often too. So when you think about this process, you want to think about it a bit like a file conversion on the computer. So for example, if you try to open up a Microsoft Word document in another program that's not compatible to Microsoft Word, then it's not going to open up correctly. It's not going to give you the right information. It has to be in a valid file format. The same thing goes with our mind. So if our mind is a certain program that we want to open up these emotions into, and have an understanding, we have to actually convert it into a format that's actually native to this processing system. So we would want to convert it into words, maybe into images. Anything that we can create into a symbol is going to work incredibly well for the intellect. So words are probably the most straightforward, but symbols have also been used many times in the past, also when it comes to communicating different truths about the emotions and about just the nature of reality in general. Now, another caveat here is that we want to make sure that when we do that conversion into words and into insights that can be deciphered by the mind, is that we don't want to get stuck up in that perspective, because again, that can insulate us from our emotions again. It would be like putting back on that rubber glove. So you want to do the conversion, have it here, and then just trust that your mind will keep that information and then sink back down into the experience of the emotions directly, where you're interfacing with the emotions again directly at the level of emotional awareness, directly at the level of being. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and click the like button below and subscribe, and leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought of the video. Also, you can follow me on social media. So I have an Instagram, a Facebook, and I plan to eventually get around to posting on my Twitter. But I just started doing a new social media campaign with like quotes and other things, so definitely check that out. Also, I wanted to mention that I'm currently offering a service that is very much in relation to the general topic of this video, which is integration. And basically that is Shadow Work Tarot. So basically it's an interactive one-on-one tarot reading through Skype or through Zoom, where we would be working together to find your primary shadow aspect and give you kind of an idea about how to integrate that aspect of yourself, and just some general context for what's maybe keeping it down in the shadow in the first place. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to shoot me an email at thediamondnet@gmail.com, or you can also just go ahead and go to the link down below in the description box, and I'll also put one down in the comments to my website where you can actually sign up for that. Alright, well anyway, that's all I have for you now. For now, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and until next time, keep becoming more you.